Welcome back to the archives. I am Skelepsis, and tonight I have found a story that the internet tried to forget. Turn off the lights and listen closely.
I was on an assignment for the Army, making my way up from San Antonio, Texas to Tacoma, Washington. It was a long drive and they gave me 6 days to report to my new unit, but I didn't mind. I love road trips. There's nothing like the freedom of exploring the world by yourself. The first day of my journey, I planned to get as much driving in as possible so I could spend a few days in Utah, a sort of mini vacation, you could say. This was January and the days were short, so maximizing the amount of daylight I had was crucial. I got up extra early that morning, carried the last of my bags out to my Corolla, signed out of my old unit, and hit the road at roughly 5 a.m. It was an amazing day. I saw the landscape transform around me as I headed farther west than I had ever been in my life. From the San Antonio metropolitan area, to the savannas of the Edwards Plateau, to the pancake flat farmland of the Great Plains region, America's breadbasket. Finally, the farms opened up into prairie, and I saw the Welcome to New Mexico, the Land of Enchantment sign. Now I was really in the middle of nowhere. Continuing on US Route 380, I eventually found myself in Roswell. I could have gotten a few more hours of driving in and made it to Albuquerque, but I figured since I was in no rush, I might as well see what Roswell had to offer. Who knows if I would get a chance to visit again. As a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious, as Mr. Ballin would say, I took a self-guided tour of the shops and attractions. The next day I continued to Albuquerque, then westward on Interstate 40. By the time I reached Gallup and started northbound on US Route 491, I still had 2 hours of driving left before crossing the border into Colorado, and another 45 minutes before I would get to Cortez, my planned stop for the night. However, my daylight was already running out as sunset was at 6 p.m. I got Starbucks and refreshed myself for the final stretch. It was supposed to be easy, just a straight shot. But looking back on it now, I figured that had I decided to stop in Albuquerque instead of Roswell the night previous, I would have already been in Colorado by now, and possibly be making my way into Utah. I would have saved myself from what was waiting for me on that desolate highway. Route 491 stretched far into the Navajo Nation. On either side of me were endless expanses of prairie bookended by dark indigo mountains on the horizon. To my left, the sky glowed a faint orange-purple, the light slowly dying down like smoldering embers in a fire, until finally plunging the land into darkness. Every now and then, I would see the forlorn headlights of another car passing by, which gave me a bit of relief that I wasn't alone. I also had my road trip playlist on to keep me company, and call me ironic, but Hotel California was playing. After passing the small, lonely town of Newcomb, the next piece of civilization would be Shiprock. However, between the two was a 36-mile stretch of absolute nothingness, an abyss I had to cross. I was not ready for what I was about to witness. After several miles and having not seen another car on the road, I saw something strange emerge from the horizon. Barely lit by the moonlight, I thought it was a road sign at first. Then as I came closer, I realized it was a person walking on the shoulder of the road, heading in my direction. I squinted, trying my hardest to focus on the figure. In the darkness, I could tell they were wearing a poncho of some sort, with long black hair flowing down past their chest. Who could be walking out here all alone at night, I thought. Whoever it was, they had no lights, no reflectors, no strobes of any kind to signal to passing cars that they were there, and they walked on the pavement, dangerously close to oncoming traffic.
I pulled to the left a bit, giving them a wide berth. Suddenly, my stereo cut out, as if I had turned it off. The screen went completely dark, and my phone disconnected from Bluetooth. While this was unusual, it certainly did happen from time to time, so I thought nothing of it. As I approached, I saw the person raise their right arm, as if to flag me down and hitch a ride. Oh, no, I thought. There's no way that's happening, buddy. As my headlights swept by, I realized it was a man, dressed in a button-up shirt, a wool poncho, jeans, and cowboy boots. His large belt buckle glinted as the lights passed him, but in that split second, I realized with abject shock that not only were his eyes painfully wide open, but they seemed to be tracking me. Somehow, he was able to see me through the glare of my headlights and look me dead in the eyes, not breaking contact until I passed. I was shaken for a bit, but my nerves gradually subsided. My stereo abruptly turned back on and my music continued playing. I brushed everything off as simply my imagination, the darkness and the shadows playing tricks on my mind. Besides, the man was behind me. I figured he must have been drunk. Indian reservation sadly had high rates of alcoholism. I looked in my rearview mirror. He was gone. I couldn't see him. Maybe he's too far behind me. No, that couldn't be. It must be too dark. Maybe? I drove on, trying to figuring out what had just happened, but at the same time forcing myself not to think about it. Just when I thought I had moved on, I saw another shape in the distance. Getting closer, I realized it was another figure. Another person walking alone at night? There's no way. They walked along the shoulder of the road, swaying back and forth. Slowly, I could make out that this person was also wearing a poncho. Then I saw what looked like long, black hair reaching down past the chest. No, there's no way. It was the man. The same man. But how? The man raised his arm again, trying to flag me down. What did this guy want? I kept up my pace, with no intention of stopping for any reason. Just like last time, my stereo turned off again. Suddenly, the man leapt out onto the road, arms waving frantically. I swerving to the left lane, narrowly avoiding him. In my headlights, I noticed he had the same wide-eyed look, his gaze locked onto mine. I also saw that his clothes did not look as they did the first encounter. Once they were clean, if not well worn, but now they were soiled and tattered, rags barely hanging on to his withered frame. His hair was wild and unkempt, with clods of dry dirt stuck in the locks. But his eyes remained the same. My heart nearly burst through my chest at the sudden shock. Hyperventilating, I slowed down and glanced into the rearview mirror to make sure he was all right. Nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to see. The man was running. He was sprinting towards me. I centered the wheel and accelerated, hoping to get as much distance from him as possible. But as I continued to speed up, so did he. Faster and faster I drove, but every time I looked in the mirror, I would still see him right behind me, perfectly keeping pace, his body tinted red by my taillights. I could feel my temples throbbing and my hands getting slick with sweat on the steering wheel. I was sick to my stomach. There's no way. I looked forward, hoping to see a faint glimmer of light from the time ahead, but I was still too far away.
I looked back at the rearview mirror. The man was gone. I should have been relieved, but I knew better. Where did he go? I looked around, hoping to regain a visual on him. I couldn't see anything. Taking a deep breath, I refocused on the road, but kept my guard up. Just keep driving, I told myself. Only a few more miles to go. Out of the corner of my right eye, I saw something. Another shape. It wasn't the man, at least I didn't think so. I glanced over, bracing myself for whatever was going to meet my sight. It looked like an animal, some kind of animal, though I couldn't make out exactly what it was. Under the moonlight, I could see it running alongside my car, its forelimbs reaching out in long strides, its back undulating like a dog. Closer and closer it came. The closer it was, the more of it I could see, little by little. Then I noticed its limbs were far too long for its body. Its body was too short. It had no tail. The head was oddly round, and from it came a trail of long black hair. I slammed my foot on the gas, pushing my car's engine harder than it had ever been pushed before. By now, I was clocking well over 110 miles per hour. But this creature, it kept up. It wasn't phased. It simply ran faster and faster to match my speed. Just what was this thing? How could anyone or anything run this fast? The entity seemed to have endless stamina. Just how long could it keep this up? Just how much faster could it go? Soon my car would hit its top speed. And then what? How long could it maintain that before breaking down? It wouldn't be long until my engine overheats, but regardless, I would eventually run out of gas. And when I do, what would happen if that thing got me? At 120 miles per hour, my car had reached its limit. This was the fastest I could go. But the creature continued its pursuit. My temperature gauge was approaching the red, and so was my tachometer. I couldn't keep this up any longer.
Suddenly, like the beacon of a lighthouse on a tumultuous sea, the first light of shiprock came into view. It was close, So close. If I could just go a little longer, I could make it into town. To safety. I pressed on. I fixed my eyes on the lights, growing brighter on the horizon. They bloomed outwards, glimmering in the night air. Though it was a small town, it was a sight for sore eyes in my situation. Looking in my periphery, I saw the undulation of the creature's spine as it kept pace with my car. But now it was slipping away, steering farther and farther from the road. It suddenly hit me just how hard my heart was beating. Beads of sweat dripped down my face. I looked over. The creature was gone. But this time, the feeling of dread had also gone with it. My stereo once again turned back on, and as my music resumed, I breathed a deep sigh of relief. I let off the accelerator. The man, the creature, whatever it was finally gone for good. Having white-knuckled the steering wheel the whole time without realizing it, my hands were extremely sore, but I was glad to have made it through. A week later, I told another soldier in my unit about what I had experienced. Being originally from Albuquerque, she was familiar with the Native American legends of the Southwest. The conversation steered toward a certain creature that she would not dare speak the name of. She also told me that the highway I took was well known for all sorts of paranormal phenomena. Google what Route 491 used to be called, and everything will make sense. Be careful out there.
2 whole years ago, my wife Angie and I decided it was finally time to buy a house. We knew it was anything but a buyer's market, but we were sick of paying triple what a mortgage would be in rent every month. I'm sure the story is familiar to some of you, and we went through every stage of disbelief, anger, and finally apathy after every competitive offer we put together was blown out of the water by a multinational investment corporation. I'm not mad about the process anymore, although it left me questioning where society was headed. How was this legal? I went to school, I paid off debt, I got a good job, I did everything right to still get priced out the fucking city I grew up in. Perhaps some anger remains. But after setting our sights on the city's less desirable neighborhoods, we finally got our home. On June 1st, we moved into a 4,500 square foot colonial. It had hardwood floors that patined like leather, and the frosted plaster trim gave the ceilings the look of a wedding cake. The basement was a different story. It wasn't just unfinished, it was a dank hole in the ground, and scribbled on the walls were strange spirals and crude faces. Kids, the realtor had said, like she knew who drew the markings. Fixing up the basement would be quite the value builder. So, sure, the kitchen had composite counters and the basement needed a sign above the entrance that read, "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here." But we had a home, and a damn big one at that. The catch was that it was a stone's throw from the freeway and that the area was known for its crime more than anything else. Angie said it was just a stepping stone. We'd bank a year's worth of mortgage, hope the housing market keeps rocketing, and move again in a year. There were some flaws in her plan, mainly money, but I didn't say anything. I figured we'd both adjust to like it there. The first few weeks went smooth, and me and the wife got to unpacking and introducing ourselves to the neighbors. Maybe it was the threat of crime and that there was comfort and purpose in knowing who you lived next to, but whatever it was, our neighbors were incredibly friendly.
We felt at home quick, and while there were some shocks, we made games out of them to take the fear away. With the pops that permeated the night, we had the game where we guessed whether the sound was fireworks or gunshots. When we passed large turds, one of us would point, and we played human or dog. Unfortunately, after just a couple of weeks at this game, we became experts at differentiating between these. Gunshots carry the sharp crack of the sound barrier being broken, while fireworks go boom or pop. As for the poop, let's just say that we hadn't seen any dogs large enough to lay landmines around town. There was a homeless problem there, for sure, but they minded their own business. Our neighbors seemed to see right through them. They'd act as if they were ghosts, like they weren't even there. Hell, everyone did. I'd smile and say hello in passing. The least I could do was treat them like human beings. One night, after a movie, I was at the sink washing the popcorn ball. The window above looks out to our backyard, which was heavily wooded for a city lot. When it was dark out, I could only see a sliver of what was outside beyond the reflection of myself in the glass.
I frowned at the shadow of a tall, dark stump. I don't remember a tree there. I swayed on my feet to see past my reflection. In between the bushes, nearly out of sight, a man was standing still, staring back at me. My heart leaped, and I dropped the bowl where it crashed in the sink. "You okay in there, honey?" Angie shouted from the living room. "Yeah." I kept my eyes on the man and said nothing to Angie, not wanting to alarm her. "I'm going to take the trash out." "Okay."
I walked by the trash without touching it and opened the back door. Hello? Outside, the wind was blowing hard, and the branches of the buckthorn the man stood behind were waving wildly as if to warn me. "What do you want?" I stepped forward to try and show I wasn't scared, but it was the tepid step of prey, like I was better planting my weight to run. The man said nothing. I took another step forward, more confidently this time, but jumped when my movement activated the motion light. I composed myself and yelled, "This is private property. If you don't leave, I'm calling the police." Now, this was the emptiest of threats, and everybody in the neighborhood knew it. The cops made a point to show up an hour late, if at all. The man walked forward a few paces to where I could see him better. He was very tall and wore a heavy wool overcoat that stretched all the way to his ankles. He kept walking towards me. My brain was shouting, but I froze in fear. "What do you want?" He stopped just in front of me. A white scar starred across his black skin just below the chin. He was at least 6'6", but the coat that ran the entire length of his body made him gigantic. His face was recently shaven and gaunt. He held out his fist at arm's length, and when he uncurled his fingers, cupped in his enormous palm was a pill. "I don't have any drugs," I said. His face didn't change any. There was no want or question in his eyes.
"You want me to take it?" I pointed at his hand, but still his expression was static. I reached out and gently plucked the pill from his palm. I held it between my forefinger and thumb. It was just a pill capsule. Whatever had been inside had been emptied. "What do you want?" I asked again. He opened his mouth, revealing the severed stump of a tongue, and then he widened the enormous whites of his eyes. He began to mouth something, but being tongueless, I couldn't tell what. But my blood cooled because I felt certain it was some kind of curse. "Please," I murmured, "please leave." He turned and stepped into the night, and I watched the bushes sway in his wake as if he were a giant parting his way through the woods. The next day was Saturday, and I was determined to find out if anyone knew about this tall man. I walked to the strip mall and asked some of the homeless in the area, but as soon as I began to describe him, they all looked at the ground and shook their heads. The pattern was repeated with every other homeless person I tried to talk to. On my way home, I stopped by two men working on a car at the end of a driveway. "Hey," I started over to them. "This may sound a little crazy, but do you know of a tall fellow around here that wears a giant coat?" They both started laughing. "Sorry to waste your time." I turned to go. No, one of them was waving me back. "You talking about a really big motherfucker?" The man raised his hand to signify. "Yay high? Black coat? Nasty scars?" "Yeah," I nodded. "Well, that's Tall Frank. What you want about him? You see him in your recycling?"
No, why? Tall Frank's a can man. He makes his living that way. I nodded. He was acting weird in my backyard last night. Weird how? Was he just looking like his weird self? No, he was staring at me from outside. When I went out, he tried to say something, or mouth something. Both of their brows rose. You saying that Tall Frank tried to communicate with you? Yeah. They both looked at each other. Tall Frank talks to nobody, and by talks, I mean communicating in any kind of way. He cut his own throat to never talk again, the other chimed in. That's just a rumor. Tall Frank showed up in this neighborhood 20 years ago. No one knows where he came from, and the man can't tell you. Yeah, people put all kinds of legend to those scars. Some say it was dog that bit him, but I never seen no dog that'll slice the tongue out. If he doesn't communicate with anyone, how come he has the name Tall Frank? Well, that's what my mama would call him. She used to tell me to watch my tongue or Tall Frank could take it. He chuckled to himself. What do you think he wanted with me? They both shrugged. No clue, but you be sure to tell us when you find out.
They bent back to their work, and I thanked them and went on, far less assured than when I'd first set out. The next several days, there was no sign of Tall Frank, but I began to fall ill. It was a headache at first,
But soon I had heart palpitations and body aches that I almost let take me to the emergency room. I assured myself that there was no such thing as curses. Why was I letting one strange encounter with a homeless man dominate my every thought? Angie was working late recently, and when I had the house to myself at night, I would stand at the kitchen window and stare into the backyard. I was obsessed, and it wasn't long before I saw him again. I was wrapped in a blanket, filling the teapot at the sink, when I saw him standing in the same place as before. I dropped the pot and ran to the back door. Hey! My head felt light, and I was in that same kind of drunken state where your fear hardly speaks to you. I scampered through the backyard over to him. "What do you want with me?" Tall Frank was staring at me. He gestured with his scarred neck for me to follow. I looked down at my bare feet, but he was already walking. "Hey, just leave us alone." I stepped cautiously after him. When I got past the bushes, where I could see the alley, I saw him standing near the trash cans. I ran after him. I don't ever want to see you back here again." With our difference in size and the blanket wrapped around my shoulders, I'm sure I looked to him like some angry hobbit.
He certainly didn't act intimidated, and I can't blame him. Tall Frank crossed the alley and sat on a crumbling retaining wall. He gently tapped a stone next to him for me to sit. I'm not fucking sitting. He reached into his breast pocket and paused before pulling out an envelope. Then he put the letter in his other hand and reached in again and pulled out another. What else? He extended the envelopes to me. His long arm nearly stretched the entire alley. I approached the letters cautiously, snatching them and stepping back. What are these? I muttered, already distracted. They had both been opened, and I took the papers out of one of the envelopes. It was a handwritten letter on college rule paper. All the ink was smeared like it had been dunked in water, but I could still read it, albeit slowly. When I was done reading, I let my arm fall down to my side and stared at Tall Frank in disbelief. Angie had a lover. I looked at the other envelope and hardly had to read it to figure it out. The letterhead read, Atlantic Life Insurance. A policy had been opened in my name for $250,000. I stumbled over to the retaining wall and sat. The pills. I thought about the empty capsulates shown me that I had tossed aside. It was my emergency albuterol. It had to be. A quick WebMD search showed that an overdose started with symptoms of headaches and heart palpitations.
Angie is trying to kill me? Suddenly, I realized Tall Frank's arm was around me, and he was patting my shoulder paternally. We sat there in silence for a long time. The things you can learn from people's recycling, I said. Tall Frank nodded, and we watched the upstairs light turn on, and my wife appeared in the window. She twisted something in her fingers and then tapped it into a mug. A minute later, I heard the back door open. "Honey, are you out here?" Angie called. "I made you some tea." I guess the homeless around her don't always want change. Sometimes they might want to save your life. Growing up, I thought everyone had a second family in their basement. In retrospect, I understand how ridiculous that sounds, but it was all I'd ever known. I knew that every night my dad tinted the leftovers from dinner with foil, got up without a word, and carried the plate to the basement. I listened from my room as he lumbered down the creaking steps, held my breath to hear the muffled mumblings of his greeting. I knew that every morning he'd make the trip downstairs to see his second family off before work, then kiss me on the top of my head and ruffle my hair as he walked out. I knew that each Christmas, he'd bring a sack of brightly wrapped packages downstairs in a Santa suit. I knew that my dad had a second family in the basement, and it seemed so normal that I thought everyone else did too. I'll never forget the first time I asked my mom about them. I was young, maybe 5, when I finally found the words to ask, "Mommy, why can't I play with the people in the basement?" My mom was the human embodiment of frenetic energy, an organic perpetual motion machine, always pacing or cleaning or stirring a pot, always with a lit cigarette tucked between her yellowing fingers. I'll never forget that as that question hung in the air, she finally stopped for the first time. Her stillness was unsettling in a way I can't quite explain. "We don't talk about them," she rushed,
chasing the hurried statement with a lengthy drag off her cigarette. She blew a plume of smoke out the open window before leaning down to meet me at face level, her bloodshot eyes mere inches from my own. "You don't need to play with the kids, but the kids need Daddy." She paused again, the haunting image of her at a standstill etching itself into my mind permanently. Finally, she muttered, "Daddy needs them too." That night, I heard my mom shrieking at my dad in their bedroom. I was surprised that they didn't know that I knew, more shocked, frightened even, to find that they didn't want me to know. Most of all, they didn't want me to tell anyone at school. Anyone at all, really.
After that night, everything was different. My dad only tended the leftovers after dinner, only brought the food downstairs after I'd gone to bed. He stopped visiting them in the mornings altogether. My mom started acting differently too. I'd always noticed that she was distant from my dad. Had always noticed how she bristled under his touch, how she stole away to the other side of the room whenever he entered. But it got worse after that. As a kid, I felt deeply guilty. I felt like I ruined my parents' marriage. But I was just a kid, and I was curious. My mom meant to dissuade me from asking more questions, but she accidentally gave away something that made me even more curious. The downstairs family had kids, maybe kids my own age, to play with. I needed to know about them, in the way that little kids need to understand all of the strangeness of this chaotic world, need to make sense of the nonsense that surrounds us daily. The nonsense that we become acclimated to as adults, but struggle with endlessly as children, like a puzzle or a riddle or a word problem on a math test about buying 80 watermelons. Another change following that critical night, the basement door was fitted with sturdy lock. Even still, I needed to know. There's something horribly dreadful about finding out that a second basement family is abnormal. Something more horrible still about not knowing who or why. By the time I was 7, I made up my mind to get to the bottom of it. To avoid getting in trouble, I could only investigate when 3 conditions were met. I was home from school, my dad was still at work, and my mom's endless movement had driven her to the point of exhaustion. I threw off my shoes and crept to the basement door, quiet in my sock feet. And then, I knocked. It was a quiet knock, for fear of waking my mom from her nap. But it was a knock, nonetheless. It was more than just a knock, too. It was an initiation, an invitation, a confrontation of my life's greatest and most terrifying mystery. I jumped when a gentle knock returned from the other side. It was almost immediate, like the person on the other side had been waiting for me. The thought froze me in place for a moment, but I knew I didn't have any time to waste. My mouth felt suddenly of sandpaper and chalk, but I leaned into the door to whisper, "Hi, hi." It was a little girl, her voice sweet yet timid, like testing the keys on a piano for the first time. "I'm Ricky. What's your name?" A long pause. "Lila. My brother's is Isaac, but he doesn't talk so good. But he's still little. Mommy says he'll start talking when he's ready." "There's 3 of you down there?" "Mm-hmm," she replied simply, as if the entire situation felt as wholly normal for her as it had for me, on the opposite side of the basement door. "Daddy comes to visit sometimes, though, so I guess there's 4. My eyes widened as a flurry of questions began to sprout in my mind, but I heard my mom start to stir in her room. I sped down the hallway and into the playroom. I busied my hands with my toys, but my mind was somewhere else. The sprouts of questions continued to grow rapidly, soon overtaking my thoughts like an unruly patch of weeds. And like weeds, the questions were stubborn, impossible to get rid of. The roots of the situation and its implication unraveled, stretched through my whole body. Fear planted itself firmly in my belly as I was forced to confront the possibility that I didn't really know my dad, didn't really know my own family at all. If my dad was Lila's dad too, what did that mean for me, for my family? And why wasn't she allowed to come out of the basement? Over the next couple years, I stole away to the basement door in those rare moments of freedom. I got to know Lila, got to like her, and eventually even to love her. She was my best friend. As a kid, I was pretty lonely. My classmates shied away from me for reasons I couldn't quite understand.
Like something about me was inherently repellent to my peers. I only had one friend at school, and at home, I had Lila. As we spoke more, a never-ending stream of back and forth questioning crammed into the briefest moments of time, we both came to understand the differences between us, between our lives and our circumstances. The differences that at first felt so normal, grew bigger and sharper and scarier than either of us could comprehend.
The unfairness of it all became impossible to ignore. Lila lamented that she wasn't allowed to go to school, that she couldn't go outside to play or make friends or ride bikes around the cul-de-sac in the summer until the street lamps flickered on and the cicadas started to scream. She even longed for the things I loathed the most: homework, rinsing off my dishes after dinner, tidying up my room each Sunday morning. She said she'd lived in that basement all of her life, was probably even born down there. She couldn't remember anything different before being locked up in the cold and musty room. I'm ashamed to admit this, but eventually, I couldn't manage the guilt I felt for living the life Lila never had, could never have in my mind. I was so young, so naive. I didn't know how to manage this situation anymore, so I did the only thing I could think of. I stopped trying. I stopped visiting Lila. No more secret, whispered exchanges. No more quick knocks on the door just to let her know that I was there, that anyone at all was there for her. Days and weeks and months and years trickled by with Lila never quite leaving my thoughts, but with her existence instead compartmentalized, confined to the basement of my own mind. At home, it was harder to keep thoughts of her locked away. When my dad brought her dinner hours past my bedtime, I'd lay awake, warm in my bed. Sometimes I'd hear her scream, sometimes I'd hear the tray clatter to the floor, the plate fracturing on impact. Sometimes I'd hear her crying, awful, painful sobs, while I assembled new Lego sets in the playroom. Sometimes she would call out my name. I'll never forgive myself for this. I hate myself for it, and I deserve to, but I ignored her every time. Worst of all, though, was when she started knocking. I was finishing up my science homework for the day when the first knock came. A quiet knock, but a knock nonetheless. An initiation, an invitation, a confrontation. My blood ran cold as I realized where it was coming from, who it was coming from. I hopped on my bike and didn't come home until dinner was on the table. That night, I heard my dad scream back at Lila for the first time, yelled for her to knock it off with all the knocking. He took care of her little brother and her mom, and that he could only do that if she stayed in the basement, if she stayed quiet. She wasn't persuaded though, and her knocking only grew more frequent and louder. I was about 10 years old by then, so I had a little more freedom. All the freedom in the world compared to Lila. I avoided my house at all costs, only returning in the evenings, where I'd be greeted immediately by the knocking. By then, it was less knocking and more ramming the total weight of her body into the door. My mother took to vacuuming the house obsessively, just to cover up the noise. She wouldn't even look my dad in the eye anymore. I imagined the bruises blooming on Lila's shoulder, up and down the length of her arm. If it hurt her, she didn't let on. She didn't stop. Sleep became a distant memory, leaving me dazed and irritable and confused, and most of all, terrified. I began showing up at my school friends, now my only friends, house unannounced just to escape Lila's knocking. His parents clearly didn't like me, and tensions rose between the two of us kids, escalating to a boiling point that ended in a fight. I slugged him in the gut, and he returned with the words that broke me. Broke everything. A blow far more powerful than he could have delivered with small hands balled up into fists. My mom says you're a bastard, that your mom's a whore. I had to look up the words in my dictionary when I got home. I had to gather the courage to, once again, ask a difficult question. Mom, am I a bastard? I had to watch my mom lose her momentum, to stop again. I had to watch what little light she had left in her go out. I had to sit there as she left the room,
Had to sit there spilling hot tears as the knocking kicked up again, each powerful thrust against the door racking my mind, a painful reminder that Leela was coming for me. But my mom came back, and she returned with an old newspaper clipping in her hands, worn at the edges. She held it to her chest as she finally told me the truth about Leela, about Dad's second family in the basement. I was young, but I needed to know. My mom knew it too. Through choking sobs, she told me about my dad's old family, the one he'd had and made before he met her. The horrible mistake they'd made, the one that gave her the best thing she'd ever had in her life but took away 3 others. About how my dad's old wife was already skating on thin ice, her cries for help that went unanswered. How when she found out about what my mom and my dad were doing, that what little was left beneath her shattered. About how they couldn't have known, but about the guilt she carried regardless. Like a heavy backpack, Mom? Yes, sweetie, but I can never put it down. That Leela was dead, and Isaac too. That their mom had done that to them and then did it to herself too. My dad found him in the basement when he got home from work. That he'd never forgiven himself and my mom never had either. That when they reappeared back in the basement like nothing had happened, even after their bodies were taken and buried all those years ago, they couldn't think of anything to do but to give them as normal of a life as possible. Yet another difficult question. But why do they have to stay in the basement? I found out later that evening when my dad came home from work and unlocked the door. Leela came out of the shadows, and I flinched instinctively as I saw her face for the first time. Saw the gaping hole in her face where her left eye should have been. Isaac was little like Leela said, but the oozing wound to his jaw would have made it nearly impossible for him to speak if he had the chance to grow up.
I was scared at first, but I put on my brave face and took Leela by the hand. I played with Leela and Isaac for the first time, shared my toys with them, laughed with them. I didn't meet their mom that day, but I would years later. Once she and Leela and Isaac knew what became of them, she struggled to cope. She doesn't come out often, but I treat her with kindness when she does. The woman I know her as now couldn't imagine doing what she did. My dad's second family still stayed inside, but they were no longer confined to the shadows of the basement after that day. They became less of my dad's second family as we all became one larger family that laughed and played and loved together. I don't live in that house anymore. I'm an adult now with an enormous appreciation for all of the freedom and opportunities available to me that I once took for granted. I know my family is far from normal, even horrible and horrifying in many ways that I helped to perpetuate as a kid. But it's all I've ever known. I love them, all of them. I still visit whenever I can for birthdays and for Christmas and for summer vacations. And whenever I do visit, I take a moment to be grateful for the fact that when I knock on the front door,
Every mystery has a price. What would yours be? Tell me in the comments. And don't forget to join our Circle of Shadows by subscribing. I've been your host, Skelepsis. See you in the dark.